This week, we're resharing one of our favorite episodes of the Single Tracks podcast. If you've already heard this one, don't worry, because we'll be back next week with an all-new show. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Single Tracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Christopher Blevins. This year, Christopher became the first American man to win a World Cup race since 1994, taking first in the final cross-country Olympic race at the end of the season in Snowshoe, West Virginia. He's also the reigning short track world champion and has notched numerous podium finishes at national and international mountain, cyclocross, and road races. This month, he's got a short documentary film titled The Long Traverse that will be premiering online. Thanks for joining us, Christopher.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Yeah.
Well, so I want to start talking a little bit about your background. You grew up in Durango and participated in the Durango DEVO community-based cycling program. How did that program shape who you are as a rider?
Yeah, man, it has everything to do with the rider I am and the person I am, truly. Growing up in Durango, you can look 360 degrees around you and see where a bike can take you.
Yeah.
I had neighbors who were Olympians. Right? Ned Overend lived right up my hill. But I also, you could see a bike can help you coach. You can work in a bike shop as, a skilled mechanic. You can travel around the world, like filming bikes or something. So it was really it's really woven into the community.
Yeah.
And DEVO is a part of that. And the whole philosophy is to develop lifelong cyclists. And we kind of accidentally get fast in that process.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, what is it then about Durango, though, that produces so many talented riders, do you think? I mean, you mentioned there's Olympians, Ned Overend is there. There's all kinds of athletes that come out of there. Is it the elevation, the terrain, or is it just that community that's there in place?
Yeah. That's a question I'm trying to answer myself. There's no magic secret to Durango beyond all of the people and in the sheer fact we have hundreds of miles of trails out the back door.
Right.
But it's really the people like Sarah Tesher and Chad Cheney, the founders of Durango DEVO, have created something that parents move to Durango now to put their kids in DEVO, like other parents, different places to put their kids in some school.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a testament to how incredible the program is as a foundational learning tool and development tool, externally of cycling. That's just the way in to building confidence and community. So yeah, there's a lot of different pieces to that. And
yeah,
I think, you just gotta go to Durango and kind of talk to those people. And then it's like, oh, okay, that's why.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Super unique. And what's interesting too, Fort Lewis College there, right? Obviously has like a really good cycling program, but then you chose to leave Durango, right? For college and everything. So yeah, again, I guess it's the community that's there, but there are also multiple paths, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think, people who grew up in a small town can relate to, looking elsewhere for college. And it was a really good decision for me. Like my sister, other families out in California.
Okay.
I wanted to choose a college I would choose independently of cycling, but at the same time, be able to pursue the Olympics in college. Right.
Right.
And just frankly, collegiate cycling is not built really to support that in mountain biking. It may be different for track or road in some ways, but it's almost a better path for certain individuals. It really depends on where you're at. But for me, it's better to carve out my own sort of individual training and cycling program alongside my school.
Yeah.
And here in San Luis Obispo, I have community and friends who can push me as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, your upcoming film, The Long Traverse, is sort of set there near San Luis Obispo in California. And I want to talk about, so at the beginning, you kind of open and close with some of your spoken word poetry. So that's one of my first questions is like, how did you get interested in that and build kind of the skills for doing that?
Well, freshman year of high school, I had a poetry unit and I was like, man, I actually like this. Like I've been writing raps like, a lot of 8th graders do, and then I started to realize, wow, I can actually use this to express some things. And I really like rhyming and all of that. So that's where it started. And it's stuck with me. It's always been just a different kind of outlet to cycling, a different outlet, a different form of the same expression, if that makes sense. There's not really that many intrinsic differences in like, expressing yourself through something like cycling versus poetry and music, but it's obviously an entirely different medium. But yeah, and then like freshman year of college, I wrote an album that was really like a rite of passage for me, kind of culmination of mile marker 18. The album's called Mile Markers. And it's like stepping out of high school into adulthood.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's cool now to be able to weave it back into the sport with something like the long traverse.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, do you have other outlets for it as well? I mean, this seemed like a natural one, right? Like a video, and like in the mountain bike world, like we watch a lot of videos and we love videos. But yeah, I mean, do you get to like perform it live, or like what else are you able to do with that sort of passion, and how do you share it?
Yeah. I mean, I've always wanted to have that little, cafe or bar you can go in and do open mic nights and like have your community there. And the fact is I can't do everything at once. And right now I'm a bike racer, right? So it means I'll probably be recovering instead of going to an open mic night at a bar.
Yeah.
But that will be available to the future,
Yeah.
Just like cycling is something that kind of sticks with you and you can do it when you're older. So is poetry, music, and writing. So right now, in the past couple of years with the Olympics and everything, like I've took a couple more advanced poetry classes in college, which was really exciting to learn about sonic texture and form. That was kind of the way to carry that forward. But yeah, for now, it is in the background to cycling, but that's okay with me.
Yeah. That's interesting that you say you can't do everything at once, because looking at like your resume so far, I mean, you're young and you've already done so many like really different things, from like BMX to road to cyclocross to winning all these mountain bike races. And the other thing that I'm really struck by is you're like a really talented and playful rider on the bike. And I'm curious to know, like, how does that translate into racing, like that sort of playfulness and style, if you will?
Yeah. Well, I think, that the playfulness all comes from BMX in Durango DEVO, the people like Steven Davis, who's marathon national champion, who I grew up riding with. And I mean, Steven and I riding when we were like 12 and 15, like was incredible. We just like do these insane lines and our coach is leading us, and it was all fun and play based,
Yeah.
And that came from, I think, the mix of different, disciplines I dabbled in, or really stuck myself in growing up, but primarily BMX. And then I think, when I race, I'm actually far less playful than I am every time I ride, And it's funny. It's something I've been thinking about recently. Like my legs are locked straight out when I'm descending so I can recover more.
Yeah.
I'm never going to, I don't want to be someone who pops a wheelie or does a no-hander in a race, because I'm in that race to win,
Right.
But the second the race is done, if there's a pump track right there and I have any energy left, I'll go do it.
Yeah. That's awesome.
But yeah, I mean, there's always room, even in the middle of the Olympics or something, to let what you learned from playing on the bike come back in and help you go faster.
Yeah. I mean, has it affected you though, like where you are right now in your racing career? Do you, I don't know, sort of second guess those times when you're like, oh, I'm going to go hit the pump track. And then you're like, maybe I shouldn't, because I don't want to, fall and break my wrist.
Yeah. Well, I think I've like grown up as a BMX kid, like I've broken my wrist a number of times. And I, have literally 3/4 of my life of like learning what not to do,
Yeah.
With jump, I probably shouldn't hit. And I think I'm good at that. And I'm not really willing to take risks right now. My career is bike racing. So I'm not going to go to the bike park and do something crazy, but it's always like, there's always a balance there, and you just got to kind of intuitively know what it is for yourself.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, I want to get back to talking more about the film. So a big part of this is about this Los Padres route I believe it's the Los Padres National Forest, right? Tell us a bit about the route and like how that came together and sort of your involvement.
Yeah. So I live in San Luis Obispo, and it's 45 minutes from the start of the route, which is in between Santa Maria and Coyama, California. Okay. Out in the valley on the other side of the Los Padres. And then the route, the Los Padres Traverse, climbs up and over the Sierra Madre Mountains down to Lake Cachuma, which is which is close to Santa Barbara. So you could continue for 20 miles or so and get to the Pacific Ocean.
Okay. And
on the way, you come from, the east, which overlooks the Mojave Desert. You start at 2,000 feet, climb up to 5,500 and like trace the top of this ridge, which is like, if anybody goes and looks at the film or looks at any graphics, like there's these wavy ridges that just go and go and go. And it's really an amazing place. And it's right under the nose of a place like Santa Barbara, close to Los Angeles. And a lot of people don't really know what's out there in the Los Padres.
Yeah.
And the route is 80 miles, 11,000 feet of climbing, goes up to over 6,000 feet. Like all of a sudden it's like you're in Lake Tahoe.
Yeah.
And I didn't see a single soul for all 80 miles, so it's really rugged. And if if anyone's interested in doing it themselves, do the research and be prepared, bring a spot device.
Yeah.
But in a larger view, this route, it's an amazing bike ride. It's one of the most amazing one-day rides you can do, truly. But it also is incredible in the like history of the route and kind of the different stories, which we can get into. I do want to say, the route was established by Dylan Jones, who is a Santa Barbara local. And I talked to him a while ago, and then like Menso De Jong, some people who are local to Santa Barbara, have done it a handful of times. And Dylan, I mean, the route has been there for hundreds of years, really, like in different iterations.
Yeah.
But Dylan is the one who first did it, I think, in a day. And then I was talking to Chris Burkhardt about it, and that was kind of the impetus from there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the film, a big part of it is you sort of preparing and then racing for fastest known time attempt along the route. So I'm curious to hear some of the things you learned about, the route and about yourself in that whole process of preparing and then ultimately racing.
Yeah. So I was starting to say this is an iconic ride in an incredibly hard FKT, or whatever, big effort. There's not really a word for the non-FKT, but it's like the White Rim in Moab, but I think it's honestly harder. It's even more rugged out there. But like I went into this wanting to, establish this FKT and like learn about the area, but I really wasn't thinking about what it meant to ride something that has this much history in it. Excuse me.
Yeah.
And how much I could learn through that process. And it really came from Dylan Ostleger, who is another Dylan, not Dylan Jones, runs the Santa Barbara Trail Association and is a climate scientist and is really on the forefront of advocating for, appropriate trail restoration and stewardship as it, coincides with like policy and climate change. So I learned a ton from him. And then the primary thing, which I say in the film, is like, we think of something like an FKT as going out and kind of conquering the land, right? You're like, this route, you're making it through. But it's much more beautiful, I think, when you fold kind of into the land and you really appreciate where you're riding and the fact that you get to ride there. And there's this route, the history from the Chumash peoples who were there, the wild wilderness zones established on both sides of the road, ranching along with extraction and everything. There's a lot to unpack, and the bike is just the way in to having those conversations that I otherwise, wouldn't have. And that's been the most amazing part of the process.
Yeah. I mean, the film is really different from a lot of mountain bike films and the FKT attempt too. I mean, like you're in there and it's clear that you're talking to people like Dylan Ostlinger and, some of the folks who know about the history of the area. And then even there's one point, I think, you said it was your first time doing trail work in a while. So you were actually like out there working on the trail. Like what did all of that do for you, like in terms of your attempt? Were you able to do that before the attempt, or was this afterward that you kind of went back and learned all that stuff?
Yeah, that was before. So that was back in March. And what you didn't see is just how muddy it was out there, so it was good trail work conditions, terrible riding conditions.
Right.
But, it was, I'm not embarrassed to say at this point, it was the first day of trail work in 5 years that I've done. Right. And so many of us take for granted the places we get to ride. And I've been one of them, right? Like I ride so much amazing single track, and there are thousands of people and hundreds of thousands of dollars that go into that single track.
Yeah.
And living in California now, thousands of miles of single track are burning every year. Like, it's just going to happen
right
at this point. So acknowledging through something as simple as, caring for the trail that you love the most, going out and volunteering for trail days, you start to develop more of a connection to that land that the trail is on, and understand like, you're not just shredding that berm just for the sake of that berm.
Right.
You can actually, like I said, fold into the land a bit more, and it's much more rewarding. It's a much more beautiful experience to see the depth of riding in that way. I think 2 years ago or something, I would have thought of trail work as a burden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But now I see it as a way to appreciate riding even more. And that's available to all of us.
Yeah, interesting. But also in the film, you mention sort of the carbon footprint that's associated with professional bike racing. And I'm curious about that as well. Is that like a new realization for you as a result of this process? Or is this something you've been thinking about for a while?
Yeah, well, I wasn't sure what my place was in conversations around the environment. Mm-hmm. Many of us feel that way. We don't know how to be a part of, advocating for clean air, clean water and a healthy planet, right? It's like, that's what it is. And we all care about that. But we all also live in a system that, especially if you're traveling a lot for your job, like I am, where your carbon impact footprint is quite high.
Yeah.
And, my job, I'm going to be flying on planes all over the country. But the way that I've learned from smart people to think about where we're at collectively is like, there are systemic problems that individual action cannot solve. Individual action is a part of it, but it's about collectively understanding what systems we're occupying and how to change policy and everything like that. And I think that the mountain bike industry, the cycling industry generally, has a lot of work to do there, but it's not something we have to do, right? It's not like a burden. There's so much to be gained from stepping into that conversation,
right?
Including lowering our individual carbon footprint, but more importantly, understanding how our voice as an industry can advocate for appropriate policy, legislation, and people who are out there stewarding the land.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you're onto something here too. It's this younger generation of riders and athletes like yourself that are really stepping up and saying, look, we're mountain bikers. We like mountain biking because we love the environment. Like over the years, I feel like mountain bikers have been painted as sort of enemies to the environment by like hiking groups or different other outdoor recreationists. And, the fact is like we love riding because we love trees and we love clean water and all the things you're talking about. So that's a really awesome sort of platform for you to be able to help bring more awareness to, for sure.
Yeah. And what I've learned like throughout this project, the Long Traverse, is like I said, and I'll say it again, is there's so much to not gain, but like reclaim throughout this. It's not something you're going to lose by volunteering at trail work or like,
right.
Stepping into this conversation. And I think cycling has is lagging behind the skiing industry or climbing that are really at the forefront of talking about the places that they get to recreate in. And this is sort of something we're going to have to do, whether we choose to, consciously, or next year, 5,000 miles of single track burn, right? Like it's just going to continue to happen. And we're going to continue to lose the places we love to ride. But more importantly, the communities that those trails are in are going to suffer.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm curious to know, is this your first FKT attempt, your first major one that you've done?
Yeah, I rode the white rim solo in a day. It went pretty hard, but wasn't going for that FKT. I was just trying to do this 6-hour workout my coach had.
Oh, wow.
Put on the calendar. And it was just a convenient way to do it. But yeah, I really think this model of FKT, on routes is really cool. And it's obviously come out of the pandemic and social distance events and everything. What I want to emphasize is it shouldn't just be these 80-mile routes that only a handful of people can do in a day. Like there's a different kind of FKT, which is funnest known time,
right.
And you bring some friends and you bring a sleeping pad and you camp out. Right. And that's my hope, and creatively where I want to go with my new production company is telling that story, allowing people to step into a route like Long Traverse, a route like the Los Padres, and they can choose. You can either go fast and test yourself on it, or you can do, an intermediate option, or you can bike pack the long one. But it's about consciously choosing a route that can tell a landscape story and benefit the community that route is in. And all at the same time, like a sweet route, right? Like an incredible ride on the bike.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to know too, like as a professional athlete, how is it different when you're racing an FKT versus a World Cup? I mean, obviously the crowds are incredibly different. The courses are different. Is one more challenging, would you say, or are they just different?
Yeah. Well, my primary discipline, cross-country mountain biking, is far from a 6-hour ride. It's an hour and a half, and it's like brutally intense from the jump.
Yeah.
But a lot of my training, I do a ton of 4-hour, 5-hour high endurance rides where you're basically going hard all day. And that's like how you build an engine. And that's exactly what FKTs are, is pushing yourself and really digging into that high level that like you can't go too much above and you can't go too much below if you want to go fast. So
yeah,
it really builds fitness, and it's obviously a mental thing too, to lock in solo for 6 hours versus have thousands of fans screaming at you for an hour and a half.
Right. Yeah. Well, it almost sounds like you're suggesting that, like, I mean, could you potentially be setting those FKTs as part of your training and then like turning around and going and racing in the World Cup? Or are these like two sort of separate things, like you can only focus on one at a time?
Yeah, well, that's something, we touched on a little bit in the film, but not that much. Is like, I had just come back from the Olympics when I did the FKT, and I had like a week off and then a week up in Truckee and my girlfriend's just like riding for fun, goofing off. And then I, only had a couple weeks until the World Championships. And last thing I wanted to do after the Olympics is do intervals on pavement,
Yeah. So
that was the perfect opportunity to train by adventure. And having something like that, I learned throughout the pandemic that picking Strava segments instead of doing intervals or creating a mock race is a really beneficial way to train. It gives you a carrot to chase.
Yeah.
And an FKT is just that. So I didn't think I was going that well after the Olympics. I was tired, as many people are after something like that.
Right.
And I was like, all right, just going to ride out the rest of the season. And then, I ended up having the best month of my life.
Yeah.
Athletically. And I think that something like, the effort in the Los Padres did set me up for that.
Yeah, that's really interesting and surprising too, I'm sure, because it's not like, I don't know that fits into a lot of training models, existing ones anyway. I mean, maybe you're kind of charting a new one. So it's really interesting. Yeah. Well, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to talk more about tourism, environmental issues, and Christopher's historic World Cup win earlier this year. Stay tuned. And we're back. So, Christopher, we kind of talked about this, but the film raises a number of issues from climate change to forest fires and even indigenous land acknowledgements. So I'm curious to hear more about sort of your role as a professional athlete, what you see as your role in all of these issues. You mentioned climate change and forest fires. And I guess the one we haven't really talked about is this indigenous land acknowledgement. So what's kind of your thinking behind including that, and how are you able to sort of promote that idea?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, like the opportunity I have as a bike racer, as someone who gets to ride 20 to 30 hours a week and call that my job, is one of privilege. And it's one where I can learn so much through the bike. Like I started bike racing at a very high level when I was 5 years old.
Yeah. Geez.
And, the bike has always been a classroom of sorts, and I'm just realizing now that the depth of learning that can come from riding, or stopping to, and looking around after a ride sometimes is really immense. And it's also like, my experience riding and racing is very different than someone who's just getting into it for the first time. And that's special, right? That the bike has such a diversity of experiences people can have. And now with that, with the fact that I can learn so much through the bike, that's the opportunity that is truly a responsibility in some ways, but a special thing that I can undertake. Right. And I have a lot of indigenous friends on the Navajo Nation, and one in particular who's from the Blackfeet Reservation, McKaylee Oliver, who's in the film, and learning about how the bike is a form of expression and culture for them. It's the fundamental same, feeling of just riding your bike. But on the Navajo Nation, the trails that are there that people are building or rebuilding were initially shepherd trails, for sheep and horses. And for centuries, Dene people have used those trails, and that the bike is just a way to continue that tradition. And it's something that is entirely beyond the bike, right? Like it really is. And it's what I'm talking about with a connection to the land. And there's no better people to learn from and to lead these conversations than indigenous peoples who've, stewarded the land for centuries and have been forcibly removed at times, right? So as far as that relates to riding your bike, right? It's here. And it's like, it's one way to get out on the land and to have these conversations. So there's continued learning along this vein that I want to go on, but I'm fundamentally stepping into an understanding that like indigenous leadership and issues of the climate is really important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really timely as well. I'm curious also to hear sort of your take on how we can balance the positives that tourism can bring to an area and also the impact that has in terms of our carbon footprint of travel and also the strain on local resources. Like what's kind of the way that we can balance those two things out in your opinion?
Yeah. So, I'm relaying a lot of what I've learned from Dylan and the Protect Our Winters crew. And just to, run down kind of the statistics, and this is especially relevant to California and the Western states, but outdoor recreation is a bigger industry as far as jobs than extraction. And, there's a lot of dollars, $900 billion for the outdoor industry in the United States. And there's a powerful voice there. And it, like I said, it supports a lot of jobs. It is not perfect, obviously. I mean, that includes snowmobiling and motorsports that do have a high carbon footprint and still run on fossil fuels.
Right.
But in a place like the Koyama Valley that has sort of transitioning out of oil, towns there do not have many opportunities beyond extractive industries and monoculture carrot farming that, comes from Bakersfield. We touch on this a little bit in the film. The Koyama used to be essentially a swampland, as I understand it. And it's a critically overdrafted water basin. And now it is dry and brittle. And there, this is a big thing to get into, but outdoor recreation is just one solution that can potentially supplant extractive industries, right?
Right.
It includes horseback riding, it includes hiking, it includes riding. And somewhere like Koyama that's beautiful, accessible to major populations is really a great place to build trails sustainably and to let the local community drive it and to, answer the call and to create jobs and livelihoods for those people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is what I'm learning as well in understanding these environmental issues is that, there's no such thing as no impact, right? I mean, just like the fact that we are human and we live, like we're going to need food and we're going to need, a place to go to the bathroom and all that stuff. And so it is a matter of like, what can we kind of replace if it is this, if it's monoculture, agriculture, or it's, extractive industries like outdoor recreation. Yes, it's going to have an impact, but it's going to be much less than sort of these things that hopefully it's replacing. So that makes a lot of sense.
Totally. And it's a way in the same way, in a microcosm, I was able to learn about these things through this one bike ride in the Los Padres. On an aggregate level, outdoor recreation is a way to, begin thinking like, how about creating community gardens or local food resilience or food sovereignty for, indigenous communities? How do we support those efforts, for those communities? Like that's reachable from the outdoor recreation world. And I think it, like I said before, it colors in more beauty to like what it means to be a cyclist or whatever you are out on the land.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, earlier this year, you signed with Trinity Racing, which is a team that takes a pretty unique approach to racing across a number of cycling disciplines. Why did you decide to join the team?
Yeah, it was a good opportunity for me to try different things, kind of have a little more freedom to hop in a road race some cyclocross, and think of the race calendar as a puzzle, and I can, put the pieces down myself. And I think it's a youthful team, but it's also got a lot of, people who can throw their weight around against the pros. So it's been a lot of fun, and it's cool to do something like the Tour of Britain in between the World Championships and Snowshoe World Cup.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I wanted to talk about your win at Snowshoe because it was a huge one for U.S. mountain biking. Were you thinking about sort of that accomplishment at the start of the race? Like, had you been tracking the number of years it had been since there was an American to win the cross-country World Cup race?
Yeah, I was well aware.
Really? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I was, it was on the forefront of my mind to break that drought. The biggest thing I wanted to do in my career, truly.
Oh, wow.
And alongside my goal now, which is win a gold medal at Paris Olympics. But yeah, for my entire life as a mountain biker, from age 15, when I started going over to Europe, I've always known that the US is lagging behind, and the women are crushing it, obviously. And the sheer fact that, they had 3 spots in the Olympics and we only had me shows our nation ranking. And I think that I'm the first of this wave of talent and development, including, what's been brought forth from NICA, that will continue to put us on the top step.
Right.
And I've said this before, like my win in Snowshoe wasn't just a result for me. Like it was the result of all of this development from USA Cycling, different youth riding programs that put me in that place. And there was a lot of work, like a lot of work.
Yeah, no doubt.
And it's going to continue. We're not going to go 27 years without a World Cup win now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, did you think it was going to happen at Snowshoe? Did you feel like that was where you were going to have a better chance than maybe some of the other races during the year?
I had zero expectation of winning Snowshoe.
Yeah.
Zero. Especially after Tour of Britain, I was like, Snowshoe's the home race. It'll be great to just be there, finish the season. And then halfway through Tour of Britain, I'm like, maybe actually this will put me on really good form for Snowshoe. And then I had a good short track. I was 4th in the short track on Friday in the World Championship jersey. I was like, all right, front row, new game plan. I'm not going for the top 20 like last World Cups.
Yeah.
I'm sticking in the front group and I'm staying there.
Yeah.
And then even halfway through the race, I'm in the top 5 and I'm just waiting, patient. And I'm like, I feel good. And I had a moment, wave at my mom and sister as I'm going by. And then a couple laps later, look at my dad, and who's been by my side at every race since I was 5 years old until pandemic. And this was the first race, Snowshoe, he was able to watch in 2 years. And
oh, wow. Yeah.
That moment when I looked at him and gave him this nod that I'm going to fucking win this.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that's when I locked in and I knew what could do that day.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you if having your family there made a difference. I mean, it sounds like it. Were you able to have a lot more friends and folks from here in the US as well at the race, more than you normally would?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's incredible. And it was overwhelming, doing the short track pre-ride in my World Champs jersey, and everyone is like, Christopher. It's exciting, but it's oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Here we are. We're in the US. I'm not just hearing allez, die,
right.
As I do in Europe. So tons of friends, so many conversations that were 30 seconds that could have been 30 minutes there. I just didn't have time. And I really hope we can continue to bring the world to the US for mountain biking.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, such an inspiration to all these young riders who, like you said, are coming up through programs that they have available to them now, like NICA and all those kinds of groups. So that's super awesome to hear. I understand that you're studying entrepreneurship at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. So who are some of the entrepreneurs that you admire?
Yeah. Well, I graduated in March, actually. I'm sticking out here slow, but
congrats.
Thank you. It was underwhelming. It was a slow trail off, with Zoom classes and then.
Oh, right.
Oh yeah. And then I was focusing on the Olympics and I was like, oh yeah, by the way, Wow. I haven't really.
A minor accomplishment compared to all the other things that happened in the last 12 months, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it took me 5 years, 4.5. So not as bad as some other schools I could have gone to where I would have had a semester-based system. But anyways, I was entrepreneurship with a sociology slant. So really like social entrepreneurship.
Okay.
And I think that's really, how I view creativity and business is like, how can it see a need for society, not just a market, but create a product or a service that can do good and be good. Right. So yeah, there's quite a few people I learned about. The micro lending guy who started it. He's quite impressive. Like just something of that scale that you can create and use entrepreneurship.
Right.
Obviously drawing a blank on his name, but
yeah. I know who you're talking about, Eunice, or it's something like that.
Yeah. There you go. I like the Cotopaxi model. It's a B Corp, and they're able to. I think that a lot of us get caught thinking of creating change on a global level, but understanding how we can have local impacts through our companies or whatever endeavor it is really powerful. So
yeah,
like I'm starting a company now called Still Spoke, and it's really a creative platform with a bunch of my best friends. It's film based, but we have this ecosystem around it. So if you will, we've got this hub that's film, and then the spokes are merchandise, artist collaborations, magazines, stuff like that.
Cool.
And it's all about if we tell a story, something like the Long Traverse, how can we partner with local stakeholders to create an initiative, whether it's raising funds for them or hosting an event out there. So by the spring, we're hoping to have an event out in Koyama. And yeah, like I said, maybe raise money for something like a community garden or help create an outdoor recreation based economy out there. So yeah, that's the lens I look at what I learned in college from and how I apply it to cycling.
Yeah. It's really interesting because the traditional sort of entrepreneur model, people will think of like Bill Gates or someone who he made a lot of money in business and then he started like giving back and doing the social side of it. Whereas, yeah, it sounds like your approach is from the beginning kind of incorporating the two, and being successful doesn't just mean like being personally successful. It means like your community succeeds and these important things around it are succeeding as well, which is really cool.
Yeah. I think it's, it's different for everyone. I'm a bike racer, right? I'm not a computer coder at the height of the internet boom, but I think that wherever you are, there's like so much room to just be good in that and use whatever method it is, whether it's biking or coding, to not think on a scale-based level all the time, right? Like think about who are the people around me and how can I, help benefit them, or how can they benefit me? It's a reciprocal relationship. And it's a sort of a paradox at times thinking of entrepreneurship and scaling things, right? And like raising funds for whatever initiatives or whatever partners you want to get money from. But at the core of it, it's got to be like, what am I doing right now? How am I doing it? And what qualities to bring into that? Because like that, especially in the sports space and in the outdoor space, like we need that approach desperately, and against the backdrop of the climate crisis.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you've done so many things in just the first 24, 25 years of your life. So what's next for you beyond sort of this Still Spoke? Because it seems like you kind of are always learning new things and trying new things. Is this something you're going to be doing like the rest of your life? Or, do you see like other interests and things you want to explore later as well?
Yeah, well, my primary goal, until 2024 is to try to win a medal at the Paris Olympics. And it's the journey, not the outcome. I really want to like stick to my craft, which is riding my bike and playing on my bike, but also training and pushing myself in something like an FKT. So that's number one goal. And then using that to kind of develop at this like real adult now, right? Like I'm out of college, like I'm in, I'm setting up my life. And being able to use the bike to frame that is really an incredible opportunity and something I'm so grateful for.
Yeah.
Like not many kids my age have the chance to do what they love like this. And it's not something I take lightly. It's quite amazing, and then being able to mix in something like Still Spoke, which will be a creative endeavor and is really supported by a lot of people who are the creatives, right? The filmmaker, art designer, photographers, and it's really a collective of sorts, so being able to support human focused media projects and then that tie into community initiatives. That's our goal. And, the best thing I can do right now is, is let the people who are able to tell those stories to tell them and continue learning in that process. So there's so much I'm interested in outside of cycling, but right now I'm a cyclist and I love it. And this is what I'm doing. And who knows in 3 years after Paris, where I'll be at.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Christopher, thanks so much for taking the time to chat and sharing your story and also the story of others in the cycling world. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, last thing I'll say is I've learned a lot this year, whether it was from college or this Long Traverse project. And I don't want to be, I never want to be a professor sort of at a whiteboard telling people what to do. It's a group project, something we can learn together. And it's fun. It really is. And having fun on your bike is central to it. So I'm going to keep doing that. And I know people listening to this will as well.
Yeah. Well said. Well, thanks. Well, you can view the Long Traverse on November 26th. And you can find out more about Christopher's projects at stillspoke.com. We'll have that link in the notes. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.